Welcome back to Logo Legends, the podcast on sports teams, their logos, branding, and identities throughout team history. My name is Kasabe, I'm your host, and we'll have new episodes every Thursday this November. This is episode 2. Last week we talked about some criteria for what makes a good logo, and we talked about the Milwaukee Brewers and the recent rebrand in 2020. Still think that's one of the most clever logos that I've ever seen, and I'm super happy that they brought it back full time, along with all the other logos in their recent rebrand. Each of them just fits the team so well. But for this episode, I wanted to talk about one of the most perplexing team identities throughout history, and that would be the Cleveland Browns. So first, I wanted to go over the team name. I have no issue with the Browns being named after their co-founder, Paul Brown. A lot of different nicknames around the same time period, like early 20th century, were for things that were very simplistic with their inspiration. So, for example, you had the Boston Red Sox, Chicago White Sox, just Sox in general. Doesn't really take a whole lot to kind of figure out. Just a lot of more casual observation type of stuff. And it really wasn't until the 60s that you had a lot of team names that were more focused on, kind of conveying that message of being fearsome as a team, for example, or being competitive in nature. So the name Browns just really sticks. As far as last names go, you could maybe do like the Smiths and kind of have like a blacksmith as your logo. There aren't too many common last names that really just have like a connection that you can do for a logo or a team. And the Browns kind of fall into that a little bit. There's really not much to go off of. You can't make a logo about your founder, for example. So in any case, the logo identities, or just like the inspiration for some of the logos that they got, were kind of strange, which is why you have the kind of basic orange helmet logo that tends to be their main logo throughout history. So for those of you who are wondering why orange, the story goes that Paul Brown was looking for some training camp sites around the Cleveland area back in 1946, since the Browns were starting to play their inaugural season in the All-American Football Conference. A lot of what they wanted in a training camp site was something that was a bit out of the limits of Cleveland, but not too far away. They wanted to be like outside of the main bustle of the city, but also still kind of be nearby in case they needed to go back to the city for any reason. So they ended up going to and picking Bowling Green State University as the college that they decided to do training camp for, and they ended up sticking around for about 6 seasons. And Bowling Green actually has a similar color combination to what the Browns do today. They had an orange and brown color scheme. Me personally, I still think the orange helmet looks kind of blank. It reminds me of like a generic logo that you might have for a football video game where you don't have like the NFL license, or, recently the Washington football team had to rebrand their team. So they kind of had to go some basic color schemes and everything, since there wasn't a whole lot available that would fall into like being trademark or registered, because you can't really register something while you're working on it. So a lot of the Browns logos that they use kind of reminds me of that. It's just kind of like a placeholder type of logo. So here's where their logo usage gets even stranger. During the first few years that the Browns were in the All-American Football Conference, they started winning, and as a result, they wanted to promote their team to enhance their attendance numbers. This is where Brownie the Elf came in, and he was kind of around in 1946, but for a lot of what I found, they didn't start really using him until 1948 primarily. There is some speculation that the design was copied from the Brownie Caramel Cream Root Beer made by the Atlas Beverage Company in Detroit, and that goes as far back as 1929. However, Paul Brown supposedly commissioned an artist to make the logo, and it's kind of up in the air as to whether that image was copied from the Atlas Beverage Company or if the artist kind of came up with it on its own. In any case, there are a lot of similar features. You kind of have like a human elf-looking person as the main design. The artist, to their credit, went with the stiff arm pose that is somewhat related to football, more than like a beverage, for example. So Brownie lasted for a few decades. The Browns were eventually purchased by Art Modell in 1961, and he's one of the main reasons the Browns actually made the NFL in the first place. They had the AFL-NFL merger in 1970. However, Modell absolutely hated Brownie the Elf, and it was quoted by newspaper reporters that his first official act as owner of the Browns will be to get rid of that little fucker. So Brownie was ultimately done away with in 1969, shortly before the Browns merged into the NFL in 1970. And they did try to bring him back this year for 2022, much to the confusion of, I would say, most NFL fans. Cleveland fans voted for Brownie out of 4 potential options for their midfield logo. There were 2 different designs with Brownie, and one of them ended up winning, and they've been using that in the beginning of the 2022 regular season. And I'm not really sure if Browns fans did most of the voting or if the voting was sabotaged by other NFL fans because they thought like having an elf at midfield would be kind of funny to laugh at. I don't really know. So if you're a Cleveland fan and you kind of have a better explanation for this, or if you actually voted for Brownie the Elf, please let me know in the YouTube comments. Did you actually vote for this thing? It's kind of a curious vote in all sincerity and all honesty. So that brings us to the last logo that the Browns have used within their history, and that is the Dog Pound logo, which resembles an orange and brown bulldog. The Dog Pound nickname traces all the way back to the 1980s, where the Browns were starting to put together a bit of a formidable defense with players such as defensive backs Frank Minifield and Hanford Dixon. So as the story goes, Dixon and Minifield were starting to get some chemistry with the defensive core in the 1985 training camp, and they started referring to themselves as dogs. Their objective was to get to the quarterback, who they referred to as the cat. So dogs chasing cat, you can kind of make the connection there. So whenever they sacked the cat or the quarterback, the defense would kind of bark in unison or just, kind of give a chance altogether as a team. And because of that, the fans quickly followed suit. So during the 1985 season, anytime there was a big defensive play, the fans started barking in the field or in the stands to the defenders to kind of show their support. Ever since then, the fan faithful in Cleveland have been known as the Dog Pound, and there's actually a part of the stadium in First Energy Stadium where the Dog Pound resides. Personally, I think it's kind of funny because your in-state rivals in Ohio are the Bengals, and you have that like dogs versus cats kind of thing. So touting yourself as like the better of the two as a way to get back at your mates in Ohio is just kind of hilarious. Then the question remains, which logo is the best, or which best represents the Cleveland Browns? So I think I have some recency bias since I grew up in the 90s into the 2000s. And they had the orange helmets, of course, but that was right around the time that they introduced the Dog Pound logo, which I kind of associated with the Browns. I also think it's one of the most recognizable of the bunch, the one that kind of gives them the most personality. Taking something that was created originally by the team and then kind of using it as fans towards your identity is something that doesn't really happen too often. Obviously, you have teams that kind of have mottos or things that kind of stick around for a few years, but like once the core of the players move on to other teams or retire, whatever it may be, that motto or message kind of gets lost throughout the years. The fact that the Browns have been doing it for decades and it continues to be something big, that really just shows me how much Cleveland embraced it. In the traditional sense, I feel like a lot of Clevelanders think that the helmet logo is their main logo since they've used it mostly throughout their history, or Brownie the Elf for some of those older folk. Like that's one of the first logos that the team made, so that would be one of their most identifiable logos. But again, the Browns brought him back to kind of make him more modern again, and they're trying their best to kind of re-implement them into the Cleveland culture. Brownie the Elf to me just seems like it's from a bygone era. It just kind of seems old, and I don't really see them making it a main logo. It'll just kind of forever be an alternate. But again, I'm not from Cleveland. For those of you who might be listening from Cleveland, let me know what your thoughts are in the YouTube comments, or you can let me know via Twitter. My username is kasabekompiles. That's Kasabe, and then compiles with a K. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think the main logo for the Browns should be? What do you think is the most recognizable? Do you think any of these are as weird as I think they are for like their team history? Before we end the episode, I do want to give a special shout out to some of the sources that were used for this video. So Ben Donahue from Browns Nation, Jake Trotter from ESPN, sportslogos.net with Chris Creamer, and Browns Daily Dose. That'll conclude episode 2 of Logo Legends. We'll have new episodes every Thursday throughout the month of November. With the exception of Thanksgiving week, we're going to be spending some time with our families. So thank you so much for listening. Take care, and we hope to have you back for the next episode.